Right, salutations, respected viewers. I am George from Ireland. So, in this video, I'm going to talk about Gay Byrne. Say R.I.P. Gay Byrne. If you're not Irish, you probably don't know. Gay is short for Gabriel in Ireland, although we spell it Gay. This is not, I mean, gay can mean homosexual, but in this case, it's simply a man whose name is Gabriel, commonly called Gay Byrne. So Gay Byrne, unfortunately, has just died. Gay Byrne was the voice of Ireland during my childhood, the best known broadcaster on Irish television and indeed on radio. I mean, he just dominated the airwaves in Ireland for decades, from the 60s to the 90s. There was no one who came even anywhere near eclipsing him for his popularity and the range of his broadcasting activities, reportage and hosting various sort of chat shows, and also being a quiz master and so forth. Gabriel Mary Byrne, that was his full name. And yes, in Ireland, because the Blessed Virgin is so exalted, sometimes we take a baby boy will be given Mary as his middle name. So he was born in 1934 in Dublin, and his father had served in the British Army in the First World War. Okay, because in those days, obviously, we were part of the United Kingdom, and volunteering for the British Army was not controversial at all, even for people of nationalist opinions. And I don't know, his family were not particularly nationalist. They weren't unionists, as far as I know. Might have just been neutral. And he said that his grandfather was a coach driver to the Earl of Meath, and his grandfather got a medal from King George V for having 10 sons who all volunteered for the British Army. Anyway, so Gay Byrne's father served on the Western Front and had a horrendous time, but anyway, survived it, but was traumatized, probably carried some psychological scars of that. So then he got a job at Guinness Brewery, St James's Gate in Dublin, and the James's Gate had a policy of favouring those who formerly worn the King's uniform, and he was given a pint a day as well as his salary. And so his father didn't drink more than that, which was important because, alcoholism was a major problem in Ireland at the time. I think, was it Brendan Behan who said, in Ireland we have a major problem with alcohol, we can't get enough of it. Anyway, so Gay Byrne had one elder brother, that was it. So a remarkably small family for the time. And Gaybo, he did reasonably well at school. He left in his late teens. I don't think he did his leaving cert. Bear in mind, very few people did the leaving certificate in those days. A lot of people were leaving school in the 1940s at the age of 12 and into full-time work. A few at 14. This is before an era of mass education. Remember, in Ireland, it's been transformed. We have about 50% of young people going to university, and that is radically different from how it was even 2 generations ago. So the Republic of Ireland has one of the highest university attendance rates in the world, and it wasn't like that until very recently. Anyway, so he was very personable. I don't know anyone had a bad word to say about him, very outgoing. And remember, I read his autobiography years ago. His elder brother had this girlfriend, and Gay Byrne, they somehow had a car because they didn't have that much money. Having a car in 50s Ireland was a really big deal. And Gay Byrne liked driving his brother and his brother's girlfriend around and what they're getting up in the back seat. Well, Gay Byrne didn't care. He just liked the fact that he got to drive. So he went over to Manchester, joined Granada Television as a presenter there. And he was always immaculately turned out. He was unfailingly courteous to everyone. So he was a true gent by all accounts. He had this sort of round, mellifluous voice, perfect timbre, enunciation. So he spoke in standard Hiberno English. He was dapper. He was actually very short and used to wear these shoes with a rather thick sole to put him up a couple of inches. Anyway, he came back to RTE because we had Radio Éireann, as in Radio Ireland. But by 1963, it became Radio Telefís Éireann, as in Radio Television Ireland. The state broadcast, although we did have adverts from the earliest days, even on the radio, because we just couldn't afford not to. And he was there, RTE, at its launch. He was experienced, he was Irish, and he was close at hand. And he made a name for himself. And there's only one television channel in the country. I remember, in my childhood with television in Ireland, well, in the Republic anyway, you had two choices, on or off. And to begin with, only broadcast for a few hours in the late afternoon into the evening, but obviously expanded into two channels, expanded into 24-hour broadcasting. Now we've got several terrestrial channels. So if you've been on television once, you're famous, and then he was on a lot. So pretty soon he set up the Late Late Show. I don't think he was actually the inaugural host of the Late Late Show. And the Late Late Show was on, oh my goodness, Saturday night, if I've got that right. And he hosted it right up until 1999. And it was sort of a chat show, fairly light touch. Celebrities, before the word we use the word celebrity, politicians, musicians, artists, actors, actresses, whoever, clergy, and interviewing them. And they weren't the very brief 6-minute ones we have now, a bit longer, and almost pioneered the idea of having a sofa, bring out one guest, good interview, bring out a second one, and they interact a little bit. And also performances, if you, whatever, a singer or a dancer, doing a bit of that. And also giving a tryout to new acts, like Boyzone famously, way back in about 1994, this is struggling boy band group from Dublin. These teenagers, he let them, have 5 minutes of fame. Well, obviously they shot to fame and were renowned around the globe only a couple of years later. And that was their first appearance on television. So lots of things like that. But there was a more serious side to it as well. And it was just the right balance of sheer entertainment and important discussion. So he broached loads of important, contentious issues in Irish affairs, like bringing some youngsters on who are willing to criticise the Catholic hierarchy. And this is the time, the early 60s, where no one would badmouth a bishop. So the episcopate were castigated by an undergraduate on this show, and people tried out some faintly risque jokes. And this is a time you had to be very clean. And the BBC, for example, in the 1950s said that humour must have no religion, sex, politics, or jokes about the royal family. Now, the best jokes could include all four of those elements. Now, we still had censorship in the Republic of Ireland into the 60s. And remember, till 1971, it was in our constitution that the Catholic Church has a special position. So this was audacious. And the Archbishop of Dublin had said to RTE he wanted to preview all their programmes and claim the right to censor them. And RTE told him where to go. You've got no censorious right. Absolutely right. So it's hard to imagine that a bishop had the nerve to do that, and it's not so long ago. So Ireland has changed remarkably in my lifetime. Obviously, I wasn't alive back in the 60s, but even since when I was born, there have been major advances. The single mothers, I mean, obviously in the 60s, it's not obvious, maybe not so obvious now, didn't even bring up the issue, but they were very much stigmatised. They were like outcasts and virtually imprisoned in these maudlin homes. But by the 70s into the 80s, he was bringing up the issue. Is this acceptable? Should they be treated like this? So things like that, alcoholism, domestic abuse, child abuse, in the 80s, AIDS, homosexuality was scarcely thought to exist, was actually illegal into the early 90s. Divorce, should that be legalised? Remember, that was only allowed in 1994. And I remember seeing programmes about this in the early 90s. An Irish woman, she'd split up with her husband, living with her boyfriend, and that was that. And said, speaking to her daughter before going on the programme, do you want me not to go? Because you might find it embarrassing. You might think it's terrible your mother's living in sin. And the daughter saying, no, go ahead and do it. This woman saying, I got married in Ireland, I want an Irish divorce. Being divorced in another country, the law here doesn't recognise it. Personal responsibility for single mothers. Did he bring up that issue? Well, who's responsible? This woman, her former boyfriend, or maybe it wasn't even a boyfriend. Okay, people are responsible. I mean, I detect an undertone of them being irresponsible by even being single mothers. But anyway, he wasn't taking a view on these things, but simply said that the question ought to be put. Is the woman irresponsible? You're asking me. Not necessarily. She might have deliberately become pregnant. She might not. She might have been in a long-term relationship. Sorry, it slightly depends what you mean by single. Perhaps as she said, unwed, because you might not be single very much in a relationship but not married, which obviously until quite recently was widely regarded as a disgrace, and they would often be insulted and their children would be bullied and so forth. Drug abuse became a major problem in Ireland in the 80s. Obviously, in the 70s, the Ulster Troubles exploded. Mental health issues, ethnic minority people, I mean, not just travellers, but I mean, we started having some people from India, from Nigeria, and so on moving in. And you go back to, say, the 70s, there were almost no non-white people in Ireland. We would have been 99.9% white, no exaggeration. So what is their experience, and are they mistreated, and so forth? And then obviously people coming from Eastern Europe a little bit in the 90s, like Romania and Poland, and talking about, what would I say, difficult issues, issues where opinion was sharply divided, bringing these things up. And he was someone who was superb at, well, chairing the debate. It's not quite the right phrase, giving people their say, and getting people to call in and say, and Roisin, like, roll it, Roisin, he would often say, whoever she was, his floor manager or something, people on various lines, and one of his applause lines, and there's one for everybody in the audience, because whichever business executive would come on and talk about whatever he had, a Christmas hamper, and he made sure there's one for everybody in the audience. So it was a very hot seat, the hottest seat in town, a ticket to his show. I think they were free actually, but it was in front of a live studio audience, obviously, and it was so popular. It was broadcast in Great Britain as well, because there's a huge community of us over here. So he was very anti-IRA. So this is something he did take sides on, saying, "Oh, it's a long time since nobody's been killed by the IRA. That's great. A few weeks." Obviously, he denounced the foul crimes of the loyalist terrorists as well. And in the early I think it was in the 80s, he said he was going to wear a poppy at Remembrance Day, the run up to the 11th of November. His father had served in the British Army, said that they ought to be remembered as well. And so he got a lot of hate mail from that, from Republicans. So he married in his late 20s. He and his wife were unable to have children. They adopted 2 daughters. And I know in 1992, one of them went on exchange to France. So he was wealthy. He was a multi-millionaire. And in 1994, time of the IRA ceasefire, Gerry Adams came along. He was the president of the Sinn Féin party. Now, everybody knows that Gerard Adams was the IRA head honcho, and he has lied and lied and lied about that on the record hundreds of times. And so many IRA veterans have come out and said, yep, he was very high up, and I saw him and I met him at many IRA meetings. So obviously, Gerard Adams doesn't have a shred of credibility telling such a blatant and shameless lie so many times. Why on earth would we believe a word he says on other issues? But anyway, he was introduced by Gay Byrne, said, "I'm going to have to introduce the most controversial person in Ireland," refusing to shake Adam's hands, because obviously Adam was advocating the slaying of hundreds of Irish people and people from other places like England. So that was that. Gay Byrne. He had some sort of problems with the tax affairs, I think in the 70s. His accountant had supposedly been doing something smart to minimise his tax liability, but it hadn't happened. And then it was a huge tax bill he was hit with. He was going to have to leave the country. And could he go and launch himself in the United States? But the trouble was, he was known as Gay Byrne, as in Gabriel. And until we didn't use the word gay to mean homosexual till the 70s, and homosexuality was scarcely acknowledged to exist till the late 80s. So he couldn't be known as Gay Byrne in the United States. Okay, what's your middle name? An American agent said, "We'll go by your middle name." Middle name is Mary. It wasn't going to work. A great appeal put out in Ireland. No, let Gabriel Byrne stay. So he did stay. I don't know what he did with the tax authorities. We got around it. And that was that. So retired in 1999, handed over. But he still spoke on the radio a little bit. Anyway, his pension scheme kind of went wrong, so he lost money considerably. He wasn't poor, but in recent years it wasn't as stinking rich as he had been. Unfortunately, he was rather infirm for the last couple of years, so he's just been called to his reward. But that was him. Always remember the opening credits saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, to whom it may concern, the Late Late Show," and it would show an owl flying through the air. And that was that. And they would show all the famous people who'd been on it, like Billy Connolly, been on it several times. It was hugely popular. Politicians, not just from Ireland, from abroad. Tony Benn, that Labour socialist Labour English politician. I can't remember, Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, and of course, this is the time of the Troubles. We're in full swing, and he got a hard time from members of the audience, and then he sang "My Darling Clementine." That was hours after the news come in that 8 civilians had just been blown up by the IRA. So some people were mortally offended. He resigned over that. Yeah, exactly. Well, there was no one to compare with Gabriel Byrne, Gabo. My great aunt, when she'd lost her marbles in the nursing home, for Christmas we gave her a book about Gay Byrne because she couldn't recognise me or various other members of the family, couldn't recognise my dad, but she did recognise Gay Byrne, okay, because he was huge and he's very popular with people of all ages. So I think he retired whilst he was still respected, while the show was still relevant, and didn't stay on into sort of being a geriatric, because by the late 90s his popularity was dipping. It had been around for something like 36 years, that show. It wasn't that jazzy, and we had more channels. Obviously, the eastern half of Ireland, the Republic, eastern half of the Republic, you could get the GB, the analog channels like BBC One, BBC Two, ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5, satellite television come in. So there were far more competitors, and how was he going to keep pace with that? So that's when he decided to bow out. Well, that's it. Gabriel Byrne, fantastic guy, someone who really opened the door on issues some sections of society would really not like to talk about. He helped us become, well, more civilized, more humane, I would submit, less judgmental, more accepting of all sorts of Irishness. And remember 1993, was it 93 or I think it was 92, this seminal interview about Bishop Casey, the Bishop of Kerry, Eamon Casey. And apparently the guards had known in the late 80s that he was drink driving, but they wouldn't touch him. No member of On Guard the Shakona was ever going to feel the collar of one who carried the crozier, a lash of the crozier. You really feared that. And the other thing is that obviously Eamon Casey, he'd had an intimate liaison with a young American single mother way back in the 70s. This woman had become pregnant by him, his child had been born, and the Catholic Church had paid hush money to this woman for years. Eamon Casey was very down with the kids, as bishops go, putting on lay dress and going to the pub and playing songs in his guitar, singing along to it, an outspoken left-winger protesting against Reagan. I was just about to mention that the public was so divided, the Bishop Casey had his child, so the fact he had a love child came to light, and that was that his son had turned 18 and went public about it. So it was a moment that really shocked Ireland. And Billy Connolly, that Glaswegian comedian, he was a quarter Irish anyway. Billy Connolly told a great one. How do you play safe chess? Put a condom on the bishop. Oh yes, I have seen that Jerry Adams interview in 1994. Okay, so people said, what was it? Was it unfair? Was it set up for Gerard Adams? On the other hand, Adams was the leader of a terrorist organisation. That's true. It was designated a terrorist organisation in the Republic of Ireland and the UK and the United States and blah, blah, blah. Been creating merry hell in Northern Ireland, as have the Loyalist terrorist organisations, the primary irritant of the conflict. But I mean, if you take away the Republican terrorists, and the Loyalist terrorists are going to stop too. But anyway, so some people think he shouldn't be allowed to broadcast at all. His voice is not allowed to be heard up until this time. So, okay, we will bring him on, but we're not going to give him an easy ride. He will be challenged. I remember that SDLP politician, as in Irish nationalist, a moderate guy, said, yeah, I want a 32-county republic, and we're going to achieve that through democratic means. But him saying about someone who'd been severely beaten up by IRA thugs the day before, and I noticed Gerard Adams didn't say that that was wrong. He never said the accusation was untrue. And this was after the IRA ceasefire. A civilian guy, not a member of the Royal Ulster Constabulary, not a member of the British Army, not a member of any unionist organisation, being beaten within an inch of his life by Jerry Adams, IRA hoodlums. So that was that. So he was brave. He was sometimes contentious in his behaviour, but I think he was a very polite. The man who called him out said he was morally responsible, left women and children as vegetables. Very powerful. Good point. Anything else I was gonna say about him? What else did he bring in? Those nuns who said they were lesbian. Did Watch's Preg and the Meaning of Life in his interview with Stephen Fry cause mayhem here? Oh, I think I did. That's about 10 years ago. And Stephen Fry saying, imagine God being omnipotent, allowing bone cancer in children, and obviously blasphemy is still illegal in the Republic of Ireland. And there's this new law, well, it's not that new, several years ago. If you say something which is hideously offensive to a large number of believers, you can be prosecuted. But actually, the guards couldn't find anyone to say that they were mortally offended by Stephen Fry's remarks, so that was that. Yeah, there was the whole Dear Sweetie letters. Terry Keane, she's now dead. That she was on his program a few times. Used to write Keen Eye. Teresa Keane, but known as Terry. She was married to this judge. She had a few children. Then her marriage effectively broke up. She's having an affair with Charlie Haughey, certainly from the late 70s. Remember Frederick Forsyth's autobiography? He mentioned this. And then Terry Keane, she was always in her column writing about Sweetie. Who was that? And then in 1999, after Charles Haughey had left politics several years earlier, she went live on the Late Late Show to reveal that she'd had an extramarital affair with Charles Haughey for years, and Charles Haughey's wife Maureen happened to be watching. Now, this was known about in Dublin political circles for 20 years before she went public about it, before Terry Keane told everyone. And did she feel guilty? Should she have said this and wrecked his reputation because he was so moralistic himself? Charles always saying we can't allow contraception because that would be immoral, but you're committing adultery all the time. Why is contraception immoral? You're reducing the spread of STDs. You're preventing unwanted pregnancies. What's immoral about that? About reducing suffering? Nothing. It's the most moral thing in the world. But he's just doing this. He's depriving people of their rights simply to appeal to the religious reactionaries, and they were a vital constituency for the Fianna Fáil party, stronger in the rural areas, amongst sort of backward-looking, moralistic people, what you might call the religious right in the United States, authoritarians. Anyway, his hypocrisy was laid bare. So Charles Haughey's reputation didn't recover by the time he died in 2006. And he didn't dispute this, and he didn't try and sue or anything. Anyway, I'm going to sign off now. So please support me on PayPal, georgecallahan79 at gmail.com, on Patreon. Follow me on Twitter, on Instagram. Charlie told us we had to tighten our belts while he was living on his own island. Exactly, had a helicopter and a stud farm, massively evaded tax. It was Gubu, grotesque, unbelievable. What's the other one? Bizarre and unprecedented. Who came up with Gubu? Gubu. Was it Dr. Conor Cruz O'Brien? Yeah, and having massive loans from the bank and demanding they be written off, I could be a very powerful enemy. Absolutely scandalous behaviour. His interview with Paisley was very powerful. Paisley was a hate figure to Catholics in Northern Ireland. He seemed to give you right than Adams in the one interview about Jesus and religion. Indeed. Okay, well, Paisley was not the leader of a terrorist organisation. I know he's came out with some inflammatory rhetoric, and even said he didn't want Adams to be killed, things like that. Paisley was elected, leading this lawful political party all the time. I know Adams himself got elected sometimes, and that was that. Okay, I'm about to sign off now, so please book online lessons with me in any humanities subject. Book me as a tour guide in London. Good night.